Sometimes the challenges that we experience in life are out of our control, haven't you noticed? And we therefore feel sometimes helpless with no way to rectify them. Sometimes negative events don't even contain things that we can learn from. As a wise philosopher once said, shit happens. But what if there was a way to utilize framing to make it seem like you always drew the long straw? This is something I like to call being the artist. So a while ago, I was on a podcast with Andrew Hamilton. If you've never heard of him, check him out. I'll put a link somewhere. If you don't know him, he went to prison for about 18 months for selling magic mushrooms. It's crazy our paths didn't cross considering my penchant for consuming them. But he was telling me a story about when he was on the bus to prison. And he was feeling a little bit depressed about the whole thing, as he probably would be. And then he started talking to the people around him, asking them how long they were in for. Years were being thrown around, like 5 years, 10 years, 15 years. And he realized that he could have gotten a lot more time than he actually got. And he actually wasn't in as bad a situation as he could have been.
What Andrew was doing in this scenario, perhaps unknowingly, was playing the role of the artist. This is not a case of comparing yourself to others, but recognizing and being thankful that things aren't worse than they are. One of the things Andrew stumbled upon was oscillating between narrow and broad framing.
Framing is a great way to shift your perspective on life. Think of the difference between narrow and broad framing like a camera lens, zooming in or zooming out. So narrow framing would be zooming in to notice the finer details of life, and broad framing would be zooming out, getting a wider picture of everything that's happening in your life right now. Playing the role of the artist is about developing the skill of painting the perspective on your life.
Andrew started with a wide-angle lens in the beginning. I'm one of the 0.002% of the population headed to prison, but soon got all telephoto on that situation and realized that things could have been a lot worse for him. Say if he had a bad lawyer or wore a tie-dye shirt to court.
While it may be true that positive people have a natural propensity for stuff like this, I believe it's a skill that can be developed by anyone.
So how can we utilize this technique of being the artist? Well, when faced with a problem or annoyance, try to assess what domain that frustration exists within. Perhaps you're too focused on the narrow framing. Maybe someone cut you off in traffic. And that can be infuriating, no doubt. But if we zoom out to broad framing, for every time you get cut off in traffic is another time that you narrowly evade a fatal car accident. Both narrow and broad framing can be useful, and depending on the circumstance, it should make sense which is more helpful once you've identified the way in which your current framing exists. Basically, try the opposite. But to play the role of the artist is to develop the skill of painting this perspective. And while it may be true that positive people have a natural propensity for this kind of thinking, I also believe it's a skill that can be honed by anyone. The artist can even manufacture perspective in the lives of others. Recently, I got back from a trip to the USA for about 6 weeks, and I remember when I got back, I developed a pressure sore on my leg, and I had to go to the prosthetist plenty of times, and it was this huge drama. And my girlfriend actually reminded me, she said, well, at least this didn't happen when we were overseas and you didn't have access to a prosthetist or things like that. And it was that perspective that allowed me to be appreciative that I was somewhere where I could mitigate the problem. Hurdles never present themselves at opportune moments, but if we think more broadly, they probably could have happened at a worse time, and a time where mitigating them might be more challenging. So you also have the ability to remind people around you to keep things in perspective. This is an exercise in oscillating your perspective of your own life. It's important to remember that this is not a case of comparing yourself to others, but comparing yourself to yourself in different scenarios or in different times of your life.
So if dark clouds are brewing, being able to use narrow framing to appreciate the small things like a cup of coffee or a sunset or sitting with your dog can be really beneficial. Conversely, if you're drowning in the minutiae of day-to-day life, being able to zoom out and appreciate that you're not starving or unemployed or underappreciated by friends can be a great technique as well. Build in any aspects of your life that are positive right now.
You can even build in scenarios that don't exist yet. For instance, in the case of day-to-day negative events, challenges, or when obstructive thoughts persist, I often find that imagining myself in a far worse position is a highly effective way of grounding my perspective. So for instance, if I just had an argument with a close friend or family member, I imagine myself having a different day entirely. Imagine receiving a phone call from an oncologist telling me that I have pancreatic cancer. Just stop to think about how much worse your day would be if that was the outcome. Every day that you don't get that phone call is a gift. The artist is free to paint a picture of harrowing hypothetical scenarios that have not even happened, even if, in all likelihood, they never will. I have a Rolodex of hypothetical scenarios which I can draw from at will, which would sufficiently trump any day-to-day challenge I might encounter. Now, this might sound ridiculous or fanciful on face value, but over time, it's a habit that I know helps many people shift their focus in life towards what they have and what they appreciate. So it's easy to feel overwhelmed by adversity, but it's precisely during those times that perspective becomes our greatest ally. I had to learn to see the silver lining even when it felt like there wasn't one. And as the artist, creating perspective has the power to shape our attitudes, emotions, and decisions. So I'd encourage you to practice the skill of playing the role of the artist, because I truly believe that when there's seemingly nothing positive to come from a negative event in your life, it often helps us gain perspective that not everything is awful all the time, and we can choose to appreciate that which we have.
Thanks for sticking around to the end of the episode. At the end of each of these, I'm going to read a quote that I really like, and we're going to just chat about it for a second. This one comes from Douglas Adams, The Salmon of Doubt. Douglas says, "The fact that we all live at the bottom of a deep gravity well on the surface of a gas-covered planet, going around a nuclear fireball 90 million miles away, and think this to be normal, is obviously some indication of how skewed our perspective tends to be."
I love this quote because apart from passing comment on our lack of ability to have true perspective most of the time, it also indicates to an extent how insignificant many of the problems we actually have are in the grand scheme of things. And it's often useful to remember as well that we'll all be pushing up daisies at one point. If you have a favorite quote you'd like featured in one of these episodes, put it in the comments section or send me a message on Instagram. Until next time, that's all from me.